My own family said I was crazy. The phrase echoed in my mind, an incessant hammer beating against the walls of my sanity. At 68, recently widowed and still mourning my beloved husband Arthur, I found myself trapped in my own home, an imposing Victorian mansion in Salem, Massachusetts. It wasn't a prison of bars, but of fake smiles and calculating glances. My nephew, Michael, and my niece, Sarah, along with my brother Robert and his wife, Susan, had become my tormentors. They wanted me committed, declared incompetent, so they could gain full control over the fortune Arthur had left me. The pain of betrayal was excruciating, a slow poison that corroded my soul. Every dear aunt uttered in a syrupy tone, every "you're not well, you need to rest," spoken with false concern, was a stab. They were destroying my reputation, painting me as a senile, delusional old woman to anyone who dared approach. But behind all the pain, a flame of resistance ignited. I wasn't crazy, and they were about to find that out the hard way. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and enjoy. Tell me where you're listening to this story from. The days dragged on in a haze of psychological torment. Michael, in his impeccable suit and predatory smile, brought in specialists, doctors and lawyers, who asked me loaded questions trying to trap me in contradictions. Sarah, always with a silk scarf around her neck and a look of false compassion, whispered to the maids about my forgetfulness and moments of confusion. Robert, my own brother, whom I had helped on so many occasions, avoided my gaze, letting Susan, his wife, do the dirty work. "Eleanor, dear, you know we're doing this for your own good," she'd say, her eyes gleaming with greed for my fortune. Arthur's inheritance, a tech empire built from scratch, was vast, and they desperately wanted it. I felt like a caged animal, watched every move, every word. My calls were monitored, my visits restricted. The house, once a refuge of love and memories, had transformed into a stage for the cruel play they enacted, where I was the protagonist of a foretold tragedy. The loneliness was overwhelming, but the certainty that I wasn't crazy and that they were the true villains kept me from giving in. The pressure mounted daily. The papers for my commitment were being prepared, and I knew my time was running out. In a moment of desperation, seeking refuge from the constant surveillance, I decided to go down to the mansion's basement. It was a place Arthur and I rarely visited, filled with dusty boxes and antique furniture. The air was heavy, smelling of mold and time. As I rummaged without a clear purpose, just to escape the oppressive reality, my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was a dark wooden chest, hidden under a pile of old blankets. I had never noticed it before. With considerable effort, I opened the creaking lid. Inside, among forgotten objects, I found a set of diaries and letters tied with a faded ribbon. The old, elegant handwriting on the first page caught my eye. It wasn't Arthur's hand, nor mine, nor anyone I knew. As I read the first lines, a shiver ran down my spine. Those pages spoke not only of intentions, but of a legacy of horrifying atrocities no one would ever imagine existed. Luck, or perhaps fate, had led me to the key to their ruin. The old, elegant handwriting on the diary pages belonged to Alara Blackwood, the original matriarch of the family, who had built the mansion in the 17th century. As Eleanor turned the yellowed pages, an icy chill ran down her spine, far more intense than the damp basement air. Alara didn't write about afternoon teas or grand balls, but about dark rituals and unholy pacts. She detailed with disturbing coldness the manipulation of local events, the ruin of rival families, and even the disappearance of inconvenient individuals, all to consolidate the Blackwoods' power and wealth. There were mentions of an inner circle, a secret lineage within the family that perpetuated these practices through generations. Most shocking was the description of how they used Salem's witchcraft reputation to their advantage, incriminating innocents to divert attention from their own machinations. Elara proudly described how madness was an effective tool to silence those who came too close to the truth, or to discredit anyone who dared question the Blackwood power. Elara Blackwood's diary, October 12, 1692. The hysteria surrounding witches serves our purposes. Those who defy us are easily labeled as possessed, and their lands conveniently fall into our hands. Madness is a useful mask for truth, and the ignorance of the people our greatest ally. Eleanor felt nauseous. Those atrocities weren't just historical. The mention of madness as a tool was a disturbing echo of her own situation. There were also letters exchanged between Elara and her descendants, revealing the continuity of these practices. An 1888 letter signed by a Thomas Blackwood spoke of acquiring land from a bankrupt family after their patriarch's melancholy spell. Another from 1950 by a Victoria Blackwood discussed the neutralization of an investigative journalist who was asking too many questions about the origins of the family's fortune. With each page, the idyllic image of her lineage crumbled, revealing a web of cruelty and manipulation that stretched back centuries. The fortune Arthur had accumulated, and which her relatives now coveted, seemed insignificant compared to the darkness that permeated the roots of the Blackwood family. The pain of personal betrayal mingled with the horror of a historical truth. Eleanor wasn't just fighting for her inheritance. She was fighting against a legacy of evil. The revelation of the contents of Elara Blackwood's and her descendants' diaries and letters left Eleanor in a state of profound shock, but also crystal clear clarity. The manipulation Michael, Sarah, Robert, and Susan were orchestrating against her was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern, an ancestral Blackwood family tactic to eliminate obstacles and consolidate power. Madness as a tool of control, the discrediting of opponents, the greed for wealth. It was all there, documented in chilling detail. Eleanor realized she wasn't just dealing with ambitious relatives, but with heirs to a lineage that had operated in the shadows for centuries. The gravity of the situation was immense. Those pages were not just proof of their current intentions, but of a legacy of crimes and manipulations that could shake the foundations of Salem society, and, by extension, the reputation of many influential families connected to the Blackwoods. Victoria Blackwood's letter, March 17, 1950. The journalist is getting too close to the truth about grandfather's land acquisitions. We need to silence him before he reveals the nature of our investments. A diagnosis of nervous breakdown would be ideal. No one questions a disturbed man. Eleanor knew she couldn't simply hand the documents over to the police. The Blackwoods' influence ran deep, and they could easily turn the situation against her, using her supposed insanity as proof that the revelations were delusions. She needed a plan, something that would expose the truth unequivocally, without giving them a chance to retaliate. Her mind, which they insisted was in decline, began to work with sharp precision. She would remember every detail, every name, every date. The first step would be to ensure the documents were safe, out of their reach. She hid them in a secret compartment Arthur had built behind a bookshelf in his study, a place only she and Arthur knew. Next, she needed an ally, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Her son, Lucas, who lived in New York, was her only hope. He was a respected lawyer with a strong sense of justice, but she needed to contact him without her guardians knowing. The pressure mounted with Michael and Sarah insisting on an urgent psychiatric evaluation. Eleanor, however, began to use her supposed fragility as a weapon, acting more confused and forgetful to lower their guard, while secretly weaving her web of revenge. The trap was set, and Eleanor, with a calmness bordering on coldness, waited for the right moment to pull the trigger. She had managed, with the help of a loyal nurse Arthur had employed for years and who distrusted the family, to send a coded letter to Lucas, her son. The letter, written in a style that seemed like the rambling of a confused mind, contained clues about the diaries and the urgency of the situation. Lucas, accustomed to his mother's keen intelligence, deciphered the message and promised to come to Salem immediately. While waiting for him, Eleanor intensified her performance as a senile lady. She forgot names, misspoke words, and confused dates, all to reinforce her tormentor's narrative. Michael and Sarah, pleased with the progress of her illness, relaxed their vigilance, convinced that the commitment would be a mere formality. They even scheduled an urgent family meeting to discuss the next steps of the guardianship, an event Eleanor knew would be the perfect opportunity for her counteroffensive. Alara Blackwood's Diary, January 20th, 1701. The art of appearing weak is the most powerful of weapons. Let them underestimate their prey, for it is in the hunter's complacency that the hunted's opportunity lies. On the day of the meeting, the mansion was filled with a false solemnity. Michael, Sarah, Robert, and Susan were gathered in the living room, with a notary and a private doctor ready to formalize Eleanor's interdiction. She, wearing a silk robe and with her hair carefully disheveled to appear more fragile, slowly descended the stairs, leaning on the banister. "Oh, my dears, what a pleasant surprise," she exclaimed, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it was just another day for tea and biscuits." Michael, with an air of superiority, began to explain the purpose of the meeting, while Sarah tried to hide a victorious smile. However, before he could finish, the mansion door opened and Lucas entered, accompanied by 2 detectives from the Massachusetts State Police. The silence that followed was deafening. The fake smiles vanished from Michael and Sarah's faces, replaced by a mixture of shock and panic. Eleanor, with a sparkle in her eyes that no one had seen in months, straightened her posture. "It seems the party is just getting started, isn't it, my dears?" she said, her voice clear and firm, without any trace of senility. "And I have some very interesting stories to share with our guests." The silence in the Blackwood Mansion's living room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Michael, Sarah, Robert, and Susan's faces contorted into a mixture of disbelief and terror. Lucas, with his imposing posture and steely gaze, walked over to Eleanor and hugged her, a gesture that sealed the alliance between mother and son. The 2 detectives, badges displayed, observed the scene professionally. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his voice echoing through the room, "my mother is not suffering from any mental condition. She is, in fact, the victim of a conspiracy to steal her inheritance." Michael tried to interject, stammering about misunderstandings and genuine concern, but Eleanor cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Enough with the lies, Michael, enough with the fake smiles and baseless accusations." She turned to the detectives. "Gentlemen, I have irrefutable proof, not only of the fraudulent attempt to commit me, but of a pattern of criminal behavior that spans generations in this family." With Lucas's help, Eleanor revealed the dusty chest and its contents. Alara Blackwood's diaries, Thomas's and Victoria's letters, and the documents detailing the family's manipulations and crimes were laid out on the mahogany table. The detectives, initially skeptical, began to flip through the pages, their eyes widening with each new revelation. The mention of madness as a tool, and the incrimination of innocents in Salem, the ruin of rival families, the neutralization of journalists. It was all there, in old, disturbing handwriting. Robert, pale as a ghost, tried to grab one of the diaries but was stopped by one of the detectives. "This is a farce! Delusions of a senile old woman!" Susan shrieked, her voice hysterical. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down," one of the detectives said with a warning tone. Lucas then presented the recordings Eleanor had made of conversations with Michael and Sarah, where they openly discussed the commitment plan and the division of the fortune. The evidence was overwhelming. The web of lies and manipulations they had woven was unraveling before their eyes. Arthur's fortune, which they coveted so much, now became the proof of their own ruin. The fall of the Blackwood family was swift and spectacular, reverberating throughout Salem society and beyond. The diaries and letters, once in police possession, were analyzed by forensic experts and historians, confirming their authenticity and the terrible legacy of manipulation and crimes. The press, hungry for a scandal involving one of New England's oldest and most respected families, turned the story into a national headline. Michael, Sarah, Robert, and Susan were formally accused of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted illegal commitment. The revelation that madness was an ancestral tactic to silence opponents shocked public opinion, casting a shadow over the city's history and the reputation of many families who had benefited from the Blackwoods' rise. The trial was a media circus, with Eleanor and Lucas testifying in detail about their relatives' cruelty and greed. Boston Globe headline, November 15, 2024. Salem's Dark Secrets, Ancient Diaries Reveal Centuries of Conspiracy and Fraud in Blackwood Family. Justice, though delayed, was relentless. Michael and Sarah, the most active architects of the conspiracy, were sentenced to long prison terms, while Robert and Susan, for their participation and omission, received lighter sentences, but with their reputations and social lives completely destroyed. Arthur's fortune, which they coveted so much, was protected, and in a gesture of retribution, Eleanor established a foundation in Arthur's name, dedicated to supporting victims of financial abuse and psychological manipulation, and to preserving Salem's history honestly and transparently. The Blackwood Mansion, a stage for so many secrets and atrocities, was donated to a local charity to be transformed into a welcoming center. Eleanor's revenge was not motivated by hatred, but by a deep need for justice and to expose the truth. She didn't just want to protect herself. She wanted to dismantle a system of evil that had operated with impunity for centuries. The pain of betrayal still existed, but now it was mixed with the satisfaction of having fought and won, not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced by the Blackwood's darkness. In time, the dust settled, and Eleanor's life, though marked by the scars of the past, found a new peace. She moved to a smaller, cozier house near the ocean, where she could enjoy tranquility and the company of Lucas and her grandchildren. The Arthur Sterling Foundation thrived, helping countless people recover from situations similar to hers. Eleanor became an active voice in the community, sharing her story not with bitterness, but with the wisdom of someone who had learned the true value of truth and integrity. She visited the old Blackwood mansion occasionally, observing the renovations and the transformation of the place. Where there were once secrets and darkness, there was now hope and welcome. The irony was palpable. The house that had been the birthplace of so much evil now served as a beacon of healing. Eleanor Sterling, in an interview with the Salem Gazette, 1 year after the trial, "Truth is a powerful force. It can be painful, but it is the only one that can truly set us free. Never underestimate a person's ability to fight for their dignity, even when everyone calls them crazy." Eleanor's story became a testament to human resilience and the importance of confronting darkness, whether personal or ancestral. She learned that true fortune was not in money or property, but in integrity, love, and the ability to forgive. Not those who betrayed her, but herself for taking so long to see the truth. The pain of betrayal transformed into a life lesson, and humiliation into a catalyst for justice. Her journey, which began with the accusation of insanity, ended with the vindication of her sanity and the exposure of a much greater madness, rooted in greed and cruelty. If Eleanor's story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming adversity and justice. Leave your comment about what you would do if you were in her shoes and share this story so more people know that truth always finds a way.